Hi everyone. Today I'm sitting here with Pedro Clivati. Pedro, he is the head of growth at GrowthHackers.com, the largest community for growth hackers online. Growth hackers also offer a suite of platforms, one for managing growth experiments and one for managing content marketing. Pedro, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good, Nikki. Thanks for inviting me and having me here.
You are most welcome, Pedro. And a few people also know that we got together lately and formed this partnership basically. And I guess it's part of your content or your not content, but part of your growth strategy to kind of build these partnerships across, you can say, all the different countries and regions that you can possibly do. Can you kind of tell the audience a little more about kind of like why are you doing this, and is it something that has been working great for you?
Yeah, awesome. So basically, like by our online community, it's almost 500,000 users is strong already. So there are growth professionals from like all around the world who are coming to the community to either learn something related to growth or share something that they have learned, participating in AMAs that we do on a weekly basis, or join our growth university that has like online courses and certifications. And over like the past 2 years or so, we have decided to really focus our resources into one, building the community, and two, building our product. So the
Mhm.
ones that you mentioned, experiments for growth teams and workflow for content teams. And for us to do that really well, we also need, so aside from building the product in the community, we don't provide any services anymore. So we do
Mhm.
that by our partners. And we got demand from like coming from everywhere in the world, right? Like sometimes a workshop in Russia, then in the same week a workshop in the United States, and then in South America. And it's pretty much impossible for us to be in all those places at the same time. So, and even like we cannot provide a level of personalization to run a workshop in Russian, for example. So I
Mhm.
can only do that with the help of our partners. So we handpicked the best professionals that we see in different countries. So for example, we got to you in Denmark, and if whenever the demand comes for like let's provide a growth workshop, or I need some growth assistance, I need some help implementing my growth process, then we will have Nikki on our side working together with our team to do that on a level that you know the market, you know the language, you know the country as a whole. So that's pretty much like the whole strategy behind the partnership model.
Nice, nice. And Pedro, thank you for sharing. And I mean, I just want to say hi to everybody out there as well. So as we
Cool.
know, this is live, and if you're watching live, please feel free to ask any questions. I'm sure that Pedro, he is not shy. Today, I've basically, because I know that Pedro, he is so super smart and intelligent, I've prepared my most complex and advanced questions just to kind of hopefully set him off just a little bit and get him outside his comfort zone. No, I mean, Pedro, I'm so honored for you to be on my show today. Thank you again, Pedro. So what we talked about just before here was the partnership model, and I mean, so what you also said was that you have kind of used to have all these services together with your community, and then you kind of went into, you can say, building platforms and what we know is experiments, and you have this workflow platform as well for one for running growth experiments and the other one for content marketing strategy, and kind of like being head of growth for multiple different things. How do you go about that? I don't believe it's easy.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it's also not that hard. I think people get the wrong impression about growth, meaning there is a lot of misconception on how we approach growth. And but by the at the end of the day, I don't need to have all the answers. Like anyone who is in a growth position, it's not supposedly to be the best marketer in the world or the best growth professional in the world. What you do need to ensure is that you're one, focusing on the right problem, and two, running as many experiments as you can. Like
Mhm.
so like those two are, I believe, are the most important skill sets for a head of growth, a growth professional, because you ensure that by focusing on the right problem, you are actually tackling the biggest opportunity for you right now, or meaning like
Mhm.
what's gonna cause the biggest impact on the on the bottom line of your company. And by running a large amount of experiments, I'm actually able to validate more hypotheses. So
Mhm.
I'm constantly inviting everyone in the company to speak up and suggest a growth idea. And our team pretty much ensures that we are running as many experiments as you can. Whenever we find something, like we validate a hypothesis, we see that something is working, then we go back to that person who originally suggested the growth idea and say, hey, we found out that by doing X, we got to Y. So now it's up
Mhm.
to you. What do you want to do with that information? Most of the times, we actually scale things up. We go to a broader audience, a bigger cohort, and scale that up. Yeah, but it's pretty much that. Like, you don't necessarily need to know if it's gonna work or not. It comes
Mhm.
down to testing and validation, right?
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I also kind of believe that may be super difficult for you is that I guess that different people within your company, within Growth Hackers, is responsible for, one is responsible for the community to some degree at least, one is responsible for experiments, one is responsible for workflow, and kind of like how do you prioritize, where do you put your resources? I mean, both like in regards to staff, who gets the developers, who gets the designers, who gets the copywriter, who gets the money to spend on ads? I mean, how do you kind of prioritize between having you, I mean, being a head of growth for a company with multiple offerings, really?
Yeah. So we do have like one growth team that is divided into multiple squads. Each squad tackles a different objective. We are normally
Mhm.
tackling three objectives during a quarter. It might like we might achieve the results sooner than the whole quarter, then we move on to a next objective. But that's also like uh, let me try to reframe that. The way that you measure, like the way that you actually measure a growth team success is not by looking at how many tests or how many experiments they validated, but looking at how many objectives they have actually achieved, like how
Mhm.
many goals they have actually achieved. So
Can
that's
you give us
like, yeah.
can you give us a very concrete example? So how could that look like? How do you measure kind of who is hitting our objectives? And
Cool,
what
cool.
what
So
what
pretty
could an objective look like for people who may just be starting with growth?
perfect. I love this question. So pretty much like we look at our growth strategy in a cadence of three levels of KPIs, right? The
Mhm.
first metric that it doesn't change that often. It's normally like unless you are bringing in new products or going into new markets or completely changing your offering, like actually pivoting your company, your North Star metric doesn't need to change, right? So that's the major metric that we got, and we are always trying to improve. In our case, that's cards moved. For each product, we have one, but cards moved means that you got an idea suggested, or you got a test started, or you acquire a learning. That card is moving across the journey, the growth journey, right? So that's the major KPI that we have. On the
Yeah.
second intermediary level, then we have the objectives. So a lot of people call that the one metric that matters, OMTM. Uh, I have heard obsession metrics. You can call it whatever you want it, but that's
Yeah.
normally the problem that the growth team is going to be tackling. And to give you a concrete example of that, that could be increasing sales bookings. Now, meaning I wanted to increase the number of leads, trials, premiums that I have actually booking a demo or booking a call with my sales team. That could be an objective. I have
Mhm.
hundreds of ways that I could achieve that outcome. And that's the last level that we have. So
Mhm.
North Star metric, objective that could be like increase bookings, increase activation, or increase the revenue per customer, increase. Then you gotta look at your customer journey and actually see the conversion rate of each step of your funnel and say, hey, if I improve, if instead of just adding more fuel to the top of my funnel, meaning adding more leads or more visitors to your website, if you actually convert more of them into active users, you're going to have a bigger impact on your bottom line than you would have by simply adding more leads into your top of funnel, right? That's so pretty much that's the intermediary level KPI, which is the objective that you're going to be tackling. And at the bottom, the last KPI that we have in this 3-layer cadence are the ideas, the tests, the experiments themselves. And to increase the booking, I could add like a pop-up during the sign up. I could add a chat widget during the trials. I could send an email inviting them to book a demo. I have tons of ways that I could try to do that, and most of them are probably not gonna work. So whenever, like when I say that we should be measuring a growth team's success by the objective goal instead of the ideas, it means that I don't really need like if I run 10 experiments to increase the bookings of my sales team. And among those 100 experiments, 99 actually didn't work. But one of them has helped me triple size the number of bookings that I had. That's all I need. Then I scale that up to the rest of my user base. I got to my objectives. So even if 99% of them didn't work, if the 1% that actually worked has helped me achieve my objectives, that's great. That's all that we need. So last year we ran a research with growth teams across the globe. It was more than 2,500 teams that actually answered that research, and we built the state of growth survey. And what we found out was that the most successful growth teams were actually the ones that were failing the most. But what that means is they were running so many tests, and most of the tests have never been done before. So they are completely out of the box. But they were also the most successful ones because even when all the tests were failing, they were achieving their main objectives. So that's the secret. Like that's the underlying message that I believe we are not looking at. Like not everyone is looking at when we talk about growth.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that is coming to my mind here is that also, if you look at Facebook, back in 2004, Facebook reached 1 million users. And the famous example of you can say growth and experiment and then process around it is that was also around the time that they started to have a growth team and basically increasing the amount of experiments that they ran every week. And the funny thing here is that if they were just have been growing linearly from 1 million in 2004, it would have taken them 2,000 years to come to the amount of growth that they have today if they were just growing, let's say, by 1 million every year. So it's kind of crazy how compounding growth effects also kind of work, and that's also where experiments come in, because when you run experiments, you create these hypotheses, you figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then what you do, of course, and where you can say a tool like yours is also very beneficial, is that then you double down on the ones that work. And you kind of use your experiments to figure out what matters and what should we do more of.
Exactly. And Facebook is a great example of that. I don't recall exactly where. I just remembered. But on Reid Hoffman podcast, The Masters of Scale, Mark actually mentioned that one of the things that he's most proud of on Facebook is actually the experimentation machine that they have built. And at any point in time, there is not one single version of Facebook that is online. It's probably 10,000 different versions all around the globe. So anyone, I think like recently, due to all the leaks and etc. that has happened, this has probably changed a little bit the way that they manage experiments. But the way that it used to be was that any developer at Facebook could have had the autonomy to actually run experiments whenever they want. It didn't need the permission from anyone. So you could change anything on Facebook if you were a Facebook developer, up to a point where you're only affecting a small cohort of users. And if that works, then you were allowed to expand that to a bigger cohort. And if that works, then you deploy that worldwide. So even like
that's very interesting.
because like that way you are kind of like decreasing the chances of if something goes wrong or if your experiment didn't work, your chances like of actually doing something bad are really low, right? You're only
Yeah.
affecting that small portion. But at the same time, if that actually works, you can keep increasing over time up until the point that you are going to be like officially launching that worldwide, for example. So I
Yeah.
think it's a great way for, yeah, even Amazon does that a lot. I don't know if you have seen like this week, I think it was yesterday, Jeff wrote a memo that he was supposedly to read during the House hearing. I don't know, there's a blog post on Amazon's blog, right? And
Yeah.
he's the one who, he's an amazing communicator, but one part that stood out for me, aside from all the rest of the things, is that he mentions that to invent yourself and to grow, you need to experiment. And Amazon
Yeah.
has probably spent like hundreds of millions of dollars on wrong experiments, but they're constantly innovating. That's the main reason that Amazon is the size that it is today. It's because they're always testing and innovating and launching new things. And most of the time, people call him crazy or like, why is a bookstore actually selling online data or data into the cloud?
Yeah.
And everyone thinks that you're crazy, but it's actually responsible for like I think 20% of the profit of the Amazon today. So not so
Yeah.
crazy
No.
after all.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You have to read his letters to his shareholders and kind of. Uh, Jeff, he has been such an inspiration for me, but also kind of in you can say the growth community in running experiments really, and that's also what we talk about right now. I mean, every time he gets the opportunity to talk about how many experiments many experiments they run, yeah, he is kind of like a big happy baby, right? Because he loves talking about it. Pedro, one thing that kind of inspired me here was that okay, so you say that Facebook they used to give all their developers the you can say the opportunity at least to run experiments within a given cohort without any other you can say without getting approvals. Is that something that you are doing at Growth Hackers?
No.
Why not?
I believe that because like we have done that in the past, and Facebook used to do that. It doesn't do that anymore. And most of the companies that work with us or have worked with us in the past, they have changed this model where anyone can run experiments. And the reason behind that is by having a centralized team that because like again, we go back to the failure rate, right? Growth teams are normally have a failure rate, a pretty high failure rate. Up to 70% of the experiments might fail, and that's okay as long as you're reaching your objective. But the point is,
Yeah.
if I have my whole company failing 70% of the time, we're not going to be standing up a month from now. So uh, what do we do? So one of the reasons is that like I have a controlled group that can fail separately from the rest of the company. The rest of the
Mhm.
company doesn't have the 70% flexibility to simply fail. So that's one point. The second point is that when we had that model, what happened is we used to have like 1% improvement in every single direction. And that
Mhm.
means that whenever I'm having like 1% improvement in every direction, I'm still on the same place. Because I go back, I go to the front 1% and then to the back 1%, meaning we are not getting anywhere. So instead of
Yeah.
having 1% improvements everywhere, I would rather clearly define what our objectives and then having 100% improvement in one single direction. I can clearly
Mhm.
see where I'm moving the needle once we have defined the objective, as opposed to everyone running experiments all around the place, and we don't see if that is actually like it's actually getting us anywhere. I
Yeah.
think Elon Musk talks a lot about that, about like direct putting all of your vectors in the same direction will actually move your company towards your North Star, for example.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if everyone is going in different directions, you're gonna be on the same place forever.
Yeah. No, no, it completely makes sense. And Pedro, I wanna, I mean, what we're talking about a lot now is experiments. And that's, of course, also something that you are pro in. So I guess that's also the reason for why we talk a lot about this. I kind of want to get back to the objectives here. So, of course, I would say, so what I hear, of course, is that we have the North Star, and then we have some objectives. Can we run kind of different objectives at the same time?
Yeah, so I think I was mentioning that, but the point, what we usually do is we define I got three squads, right? We have people with marketing background and skill sets, data engineering, someone with development skills from the product team, a designer, and a product manager. So those are kind of the skill sets that we have on the growth team. Then we have them divided into three squads. Each squad has a clear objective that they are trying to solve during the quarter, right? So they are only responsible for that. Most of the squad is a dedicated team, but there is also some players that participated in all of the squads. So designer, for example, is someone who runs from squad to squad. So it's cross-functional. Whenever we need that, he goes to a different squad. But developers, marketers are normally dedicated to a single squad. So every quarter, we review our objectives, we define something new for us to solve, and then we divided the teams and we start to run experiments towards that direction. So that's pretty much the structure, yeah. And I think one of the most, I think I mentioned that before, but one of the most important skill sets of a growth leader, it's defining that objective. It's pretty much like tackling the right problem. So whenever you decide what you're going to be doing for the quarter, what your objective is, just make sure that that's the biggest opportunity or the bigger problem that you can solve right now.
Makes sense. And I mean, okay, so let's say what we also talked about is the funnel, the traditional marketing funnel or Pirates metrics funnel. So what we say is that we have awareness, we have activation, awareness, acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. And I mean, ideally within a company, let's say you have 6 squads, one for each of these different stages in the funnel. And do you just keep those objectives for as long as the company is running? Kind of how long time do we need to focus on one objective at a time? I mean, if you have, let's say, 6 teams, do we ever have to change them? Or, I mean, how do you go about that?
Yeah. So we are constantly reviewing that every quarter. So every 3 months, we renew our objective. We might define that we're going to be tackling the same problem, but it normally changes once we have reached our goal. So for every objective, we got a baseline and a goal that we need to reach. That could be, for example, let's decrease the bounce rate of our website from 50% to 20%, right? So to do that, we are going to be reviewing the web copy, reviewing every page, posting new content, changing image, changing page speed. There are like hundreds of things that we can do to actually decrease that. Once I got to the point where our bounce rate is 25%, I'm good to move to the next objective. Like we have reached our goal and I can move on to a different objective. It could be, I don't know, like improve SEO or place us in a better position on Google, whatever that is. But normally we move on to the next objective. We don't keep doing the same. And the reason behind that is because once we have validated, so for example, one real objective that we had a while ago was to validate a paid acquisition channel. Right? Our brand wasn't doing any paid media. We were pretty successful just by the community, or organic and SEO and word of mouth and the book that Sean wrote, everything. So we were supposed to find out if we like, let's validate the paid acquisition channel, right? The goal to validate the paid acquisition channel was to get a cost of acquisition lower than the one that we have right now. So I have a cost per visitor, I have a cost per lead, I have a cost per client. So am I able to actually have a lower cost of acquisition for these 3 stages by using paid media acquisition? So then we started testing. So we tested it on Google, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Amazon, on everywhere, on display, on search, on shops, on different keywords, different channels, different banners, different positions. I mean, it was like a whole deal for us to actually get to the point where we actually lower the cost of acquisition for the 3 stages. So once we have achieved that, the growth team has done its job. We have validated that it's possible to achieve a cost of acquisition that is lower than the one that we currently have. By doing that, I normally bring that finding, like the experiment already tracks, like everything is mapped on experiment. So on experiments, the tool. So what I normally do is take that page, which includes our results, every test that we ran, what worked, what didn't work, and then I bring to the person who originally suggested that. In our case, was our CMO, and I say, hey, it's possible. Here's what we found. Now you decided what you want to do with it. But if he decided that, all right, so that's something that we are gonna keep doing, he's probably gonna bring someone from or reallocate someone from his team to only do paid media, or bring someone from hire someone new to just take care of that new channel. So normally once that becomes a process, an ongoing process, that it's much more about performance and adjustment, etc., then it goes out of the growth team because it's already validated, and it becomes a process somewhere else under a different team in the company.
Yeah, it makes sense. It totally makes sense. And I mean, one of the things that I'm considering right now is that what I heard here was that, and that's also where you are a pro, can you say, that you are good at experimenting across multiple channels at the same time? Because typically what you would say is that you should not pursue all channels at once, right? I mean, typically you would say, okay, so there's one channel or 2 channels, and we kind of try to prioritize which channel should we focus on. And I mean, what I would probably talk about here is what we could call the minimum viable test, right? That you will run a minimum viable test in a certain channel. How do you kind of go about defining, you can say, for that specific experiment that we talked about just before, how do you went about defining what is our minimum viable test within all these different channels?
It's a good question. So basically, I couldn't agree more with you about using the minimum resources possible to validate something before deploying any more people, time, money, or anything on it. So we normally discuss that a lot before actually putting something into production. How do we find out about these without necessarily building from scratch, right? So a lot of the thing, and that's like, I believe that's one of, that's where our developers in the growth team actually come in. Instead of pushing something to the product team, can we do it internally? Meaning, can we do it only in the growth team? And if that works out, we send it to them. Most of the time that's already possible, because like we have a pretty complete skill set under our team, but a lot of the times you're gonna need a cross-functional effort, right? I'm gonna need support from my product team, my sales team. A lot of the times it's from the sales team. Like if I'm not gonna put all of my product team to build something, it's probably gonna be it's gonna be done manually. Like whenever we do that, sometimes we allocate that to the product team or to the sales team. And once we have even hired a third-party vendor, an agency, to work as an SDR for us when we were trying to validate the outbound channel. So instead of doing that internally, we actually hired someone to do the hands-on part of the work, which was actually, like, I believe back then we weren't able to automate the LinkedIn messages. And so you got a cadence that was sending 2 or 3 emails, and then we got a LinkedIn adding, and then LinkedIn message sending, and then we went back to the email channel. And to do that, it was a lot of manual work. So we hired someone just to do that from the outside. So but answering to your question, Nikki, I don't think there is like one single answer to that. It goes from case to case. Like we always evaluate like where we are at in terms of so let me take a step back here to rephrase that. But every growth meeting, I start my growth meeting by zooming out and looking at the results of our objectives. Instead of looking at your tasks, you look first at the results that you're bringing to the company as a whole. So the major KPIs that we have, your North Star metrics and your objectives. That tells me how I should be running my next sprint. Like, let's say that I'm at the end of the quarter, I haven't achieved half of the results that I need. So we don't have any time and we need a lot of results. So then I go to my sprint and I know that I'm going to be filtering and prioritizing my ideas based on impact or how confident I am that it's going to work out. I don't care how easy it is. On the other hand, I might be like, if I have already achieved the results that I was expecting, and I still have like 3 weeks to the end of the quarter, that allows me to run the experiments that I'm less confident that are going to work out. Because I have already achieved the results that I expect. Now I can run things like that I'm not so certain of. So I think by zooming out and looking at the bigger picture, that tells you what you should be prioritizing next.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. And I think you're completely right. There's no one answer to that specific question. But again, it's about kind of like, what is the minimum amount of resources that we should spend in order to test our hypothesis, to get valid enough results, to have what can we call a qualified solution, or to test our hypothesis in a qualitative way. Pedro, so the podcast here, of course, or the show is called Out of Growth. And I always have one question that I'm I'm asking my guest on the show. And then now you're going to get it. So Pedro, so imagine that you woke up one day and GrowthHackers or your company was out of growth. What would be the first thing you would do to kind of figure out what has went wrong? Or maybe what would you do about it?
Well, I think the first step that I would take is actually start looking at our user data. So that's pretty much where it always starts. To define an North Star metric, to define the objectives, to define the task that we do, everything starts by looking at the data. So getting the data and looking at the graphics to see what happened, that would be my first step, trying to figure out what the heck went wrong. And once we found out what is wrong, that's going to tell me what I'm going to be doing next. But generally speaking, I would probably just starting testing again, testing, because no one has no one can have all the answers. So I would pretty much define one thing and start testing the crap out of it.
Cool. And to kind of be more specific about what kind of data would you look at? I mean, what data would you look at to figure out what is going on here?
Yeah. All right. So there are tons of so in our case, we use amplitude and Mixpanel. Due to our platform being integrated with them, we actually use both, because then we can actually better integrate and look at it from our customer's lens. So I would go straight to my Amplitude and Mixpanel account. There are tons of others that people use, but that's the place I would go, because then I can have we have a lot of flows to see what our users are doing, what happened, level of access, weekly active users, monthly active users, anything that we want to validate, a test that we wanted to validate, then we create a cohort on there to be tracking the data. So we also use Segment as our single source of truth. So whenever a new tool comes into our stack, we plug that into Segment, and we got events coming from the new tool from day zero, right? So that's pretty much became kind of internalizing the process of the company. Before any new feature goes online, it needs to have an event. It needs to be mapped out on Segment, and it needs to be sending events. The same applies for everything, even from CRM or customer service tools, marketing tools, email tools, that all send events to our Segment. And from Segment, I just connect that everywhere else, right? On experiments, when we're running a test, on Mixpanel and Amplitude, when we want to analyze user behavior, or anywhere, pretty much anywhere else.
No, it completely makes sense, and everybody should do that. But it's a difficult task to do, and it's difficult to set up and track and measure. I mean, well, I guess that's for another podcast. So Pedro,
Yeah.
I mean, so 35 minutes has passed now, and we are going to round the show off. So how
Cool.
can people get to know more about you, or find you, or speak with you, and kind of learn more about Growth Hackers?
Cool. Yeah. So if you wanna to get in touch with me, you can either be on LinkedIn, Pedro Clivati, on Twitter, Pedro Clivati, or on my email, pedro@growthhackers.com. Feel free to reach out to ask any questions about what we have talked about, or even about growthhackers.com or its tools. I'm happy to chat further with anyone. So thanks for having me again, Nikki. It was a real pleasure to be here.
You're most welcome, Pedro. And of course, for everybody listening in, I will add all his links and his personal email address even to the show notes. So if you have any comments or any questions for Pedro, now you have his full access and attention. Pedro, thank you so much for being here today. It was a great pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Thanks for everyone who tuned in.